On July 23, 2006, a major accident occurred at Chicago Airport, where two planes were about to collide on the same runway. Many people would have lost their lives if this accident had happened. What was the reason behind the accident? Why was the life of so many people put in danger? Let us discuss this in detail. Chicago's O HARE International Airport is the sixth busiest airport in the world. On July 23, 2006, at O HARE Airport in Chicago, a Boeing 737 airplane was preparing to take off for Denver International Airport in Colorado. This was flight number 1015 of the United Airlines, which was scheduled to fly from Chicago Airport at 9:45 p.m. The 322 model of the Boeing 737 series was approximately 19 years old, with the registration number N315UA. The flight was carrying 120 passengers and 7 crew members. It was a routine flight. And all ground checks of the aircraft were completed on time before takeoff. Everything was going on as usual. At the same time, Atlas Airlines Flight 6972 was preparing to land at Chicago Airport after completing its 9-hour flight from Frankfurt Airport in Germany. This aircraft is the 47UF model of the Boeing 747 series. Its registration number was N418MC. This was a reasonably new aircraft that was only 4 years old. There were 4 crew members on board. Due to some special events, the flight crew approached Chicago Airport runway 14R for landing. As already established, since O HARE Airport in Chicago is the busiest, its control tower is divided into 2 parts to accommodate the load. The first tower is NLC, that is North Local Control, and the second tower is SLC, that is South Local Control. However, on that fateful day, the North Local Control Tower was closed. Hence, the responsibility of landing and takeoff of the planes on both runways 14R and 27L was of the South Local Control Tower. With the increase in workload, the South Local Control Tower needed 2 additional controllers to guide the flights of the North Local Control Tower. The 2 additional controllers would determine the position of the Electronic Flight Strip Transfer System, that is EFSTS, and the Local Monitor, that is LMN. After completing all ground checks at the airport, the United Airlines flight was making final preparations for takeoff. On that day, there had been highly favorable weather conditions and the visibility was very good. At the same time, at around 9:57 p.m., the Atlas Airlines flight crew made initial contact with the South Local Control Tower for landing permission. The South Control Tower gave Atlas Airlines permission to land on runway 14R. The controller informed the flight pilots that the runway would be cleared before landing. Following the usual flight landing procedures, the controller also provided all the information regarding wind positions and direction to the flight pilots. On the one hand, where Atlas Airlines was preparing to land, United Airlines Boeing 737 reached runway 27L and was all set to take off. The United Airlines flight, ready for takeoff from runway 27L, requested the controller to give them 2 more minutes to complete its pre-takeoff checklist and receive a green signal for the same. The 2 runways, 14R and 27L, intersect at a point. However, this fact was not considered by the controllers managing the takeoff and landing of flights. On the one hand, the Atlas Airlines flight was approaching runway 14R for landing, while on the other, the United Airlines flight on runway 27L was not yet fully ready for takeoff. It's very common to run out of time when you're on the runway and aren't ready to leave yet. The Atlas Airlines flight was approaching runway 14R at a speed of 3 miles per hour. On the other hand, the United Airlines flight was now making final preparations for takeoff. Both aircrafts were now supposed to land and take off at the same time. The United Airlines flight wanted to coordinate with the third local controller board to get information about the remaining departures from runway 27L. Due to the extra load, the tower controller was facing distractions and likely was confused. In all these confusing moments, the controller looked at the local flight board so that he could check all the flights taking off from runway 27L. Being a busy airport, at that time, many flights were requesting takeoff from runway 27L. The Atlas Airlines flight was the last flight to land that night. Due to this, the flight was clearly visible on the D-Bright display system. D-Bright, that is, Digital Bright Radar Indicator Tower Equipment, is an AI system that shows all the flights flying around the airport on a single display. Since Atlas Airlines flight was the last flight to land that night, the controller diverted his attention to only the flights that were to take off. The controller was busy handling the flights taking off after checking his flight board. It was then that the controller realized that another aircraft was ready for takeoff from runway 27L. At about 10:20 p.m., while the controller was trying to manage it all, United Airlines flight waiting on runway 27L finally made a request for takeoff. The controller checked runway 14R from his window to confirm that there were no other flights there. The controller then analyzed the positions of all flights that had just taken off from the airport to check that there was no flight turbulence around the airport. After checking all these factors, the controller granted permission to United Airlines to take off from runway 27L. All these decisions were made in a short span of time and were likely to leave the controller confused. The controller then informed United Airlines flight about the wind situation and finally gave permission for takeoff. Within seconds, the United Airlines flight starts moving on the runway for takeoff. At the exact same time, the Atlas Airlines flight lands on runway 14R. Both planes start moving towards each other at very high speed. The United Airlines flight was proceeding on the runway with a takeoff speed of around 110 knots. When the captain saw the Atlas Airlines flight coming on runway 14R, he realized that it did not seem like the airplane was going to stop. The Atlas Airlines flight was moving at a speed of around 15 to 20 knots at that time. The captain of the United Airlines was convinced that it was not possible to stop the takeoff at this speed, and even if he tried to stop, the plane will still collide with the Atlas Airlines flight. So the captain continues the takeoff and increases the speed of the plane. Alternately, the captain could lower his takeoff speed and turn the plane to the right. However, there were a lot of planes on the right side of the runway, and the captain was sure that doing so would cause the plane to crash. At that time, the plane had full fuel, and if the crash caused the plane to catch fire, it was impossible for the passengers to survive. That is why the captain chose to increase the takeoff speed. The Atlas Airlines plane was still moving towards them. The captain of the United Airlines plane now decides that he has to take off the plane early to avoid the collision. Therefore, the captain increases the rotation speed of the plane. The work of the rotation speed is to lift the nose of the plane upwards and take it off the ground. The captain now starts the rotation before the required speed so that the plane can take off as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, all this was happening very fast, and the two planes could collide at any time. The Atlas Airlines plane had reached the middle of the runway by then. Had both planes collided, hundreds of people would have lost their lives. By then, the controller from ATC Tower had also seen both planes coming towards each other. The controller triggers the radio and screams, "Stop, stop, stop." And a few seconds before the disaster, the United Airlines plane takes off before the deck of the Atlas Airlines plane, and a major accident is avoided. After takeoff, the United Airlines captain questioned the controller why the Atlas Airlines plane was not stopped before their takeoff runway. To this, the captain of the Atlas Airlines replied that they were not informed by the controller about this. Later, the NTSB reported that both the planes avoided colliding with each other by a distance of only 35 feet. This incident was the most dangerous incident of 2006 for Chicago O HARE International Airport, in which hundreds of passengers could have lost their lives. The NTSB also said that the accident was averted only because of the United Airlines captain's judgment and good luck. However, good luck is not always by your side. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the incident and submitted its final report on December 14, 2007. In its report, the NTSB said that the main reason for the incident was that the ATC controller could not properly monitor the flight of Atlas Airlines and did not anticipate that the two flights could collide on the runway. The NTSB also ordered the FFA to install a new type of status light on the runway so that even if the controller did not pay attention, the pilots could reasonably anticipate situations like this. The red light in the middle of the runway warns the pilot to thoroughly check around the runway before landing or taking off. We understand that it is natural to be upset after learning about airplane accidents, but we also want to remind you that air travel is currently the safest mode of transportation. Airplane accidents are very rare in comparison to car accidents and other accidents all over the world. So please be assured and enjoy air travel with your family. We wish you a safe and pleasant air journey.
If you liked our video, please encourage us by clicking on like and subscribe button. We are really grateful to you for your kind cooperation. Thanks a lot.